Security Council needs.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. President Donald Trump has said that he expects to meet Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Meanwhile, interim leader Delcy Rodriguez rejected Trump's claim of U.S. control, insisting Venezuela remains sovereign. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian drone strikes have hit Kyiv just before midnight of Friday, killing 4 people, including an emergency medic, and injuring at least 19 people, with 14 hospitalized. Military administration head reports buildings and critical infrastructure were damaged as well. 3 people are unaccounted for as bushfires rage across Australia's state of Victoria, with firefighters battling 30 active blazes under a catastrophic fire danger rating. Premier Jacinta Allen has warned of one of the state's most dangerous fire days in years. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has urged Europe to take Donald Trump seriously on Greenland after Washington floated buying the Danish. According to joint press remarks, Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati and EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said the body must begin work without delay. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman says NASA astronauts aboard the International Space Station will return to Earth earlier than planned following a medical issue involving one crew member. US President Donald Trump has said he held a great meeting with Intel CEO Lip Bu-tan, calling him very successful and praising the US government's 10% stake in the chip maker. Intel shares have jumped in extended trading, up about 75% since the CHIPS Act investment. Now for this hour, we start with US President Donald Trump has said on January 8th that the world's largest oil companies have pledged to spend at least $100 billion to rebuild Venezuela's crippled oil sector as part of his push to revive production and lower global prices. Trump made the comments during an interview and said he's calling a Friday White House meeting with top oil executives to discuss the plan and the opportunity in Venezuela. But there is growing skepticism among the major oil companies about committing to massive investments given Venezuela's damaged infrastructure, long history of political instability, and legal risks over past expropriations. As a result, the White House is expanding invitations to other industry players and considering guarantees to slow-moving measures to get them to the table. Trump has also said the U.S. will continue selling Venezuelan crude and hopes boosted output will help lower oil prices for consumers worldwide as part of a broader energy strategy. The meeting is set for Friday afternoon as officials seek to turn the investment promises into action. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Jim Rice. He's a professor of international law and international affairs, joins us live from Wycombe. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. Good to see you. Happy New Year's, actually.
Happy New Year to you, Asuma. It's good to be back. And again, Happy New Year to you and your whole news team.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's been a while. Now looking at this, how do you think Trump will convince the oil companies and maybe other industries or other industry players to invest in Venezuela, while we know that Venezuela will stay unstable for some time?
Well, I don't think, the short answer is I don't think he will be able to, not without guarantees, as your lead-in suggested, of billions and billions of dollars of U.S. government funds to underwrite what the oil companies are doing. And the reason for this is because these oil companies and any companies really need an environment like the rule of law, in which the law is applied evenly across the country, and that dictators and rulers aren't above the law. And so my view is that they're not going to be very enthusiastic about this, unless, of course, Trump promises to give them vast amounts of money as a bribe to go in.
Right. Let's say if Trump was unsuccessful in, convincing these players or oil companies to invest, do you think he will lash out? Do you think he has any other cards to play over here? Because he cannot be putting tariffs on them, can he?
No. Well, you're right. There's no doubt he would lash out, and I think that this idea of him leaning on the oil companies is another form of Trump's coercion to try and get his way. But this whole thing, and in fact, I wrote an article about this that was published just today. This whole Venezuelan campaign has been predicated on a series of lies, and the whole thing is transparently a lie. And the idea of Trump being able to run Venezuela, which is, just a few weeks ago has been an adversarial country, an enemy according to Trump, is essentially preposterous. I don't see how it's going to work out.
Right. And don't you think that Trump understands the fact that if the crude prices go down, is it technically beneficial for these oil companies in short term?
That's a very good point that you make. And again, I'm not an expert on crude oil in different parts of the world, but as I'm given to understand, the oil that exists in Venezuela is a very difficult to pump or to mine oil. It's very thick or viscous, and it takes an enormous amount of refining to get the oil in the condition to be able to ship it around the world. So it's going to be a very expensive process, and I'm sure that the oil companies are factoring this in.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. And Professor, lastly, how do you think how will Arab countries be eyeing this? Because since Trump took office, he was warming up his relationship with Arab countries. One of his first trips were all in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. And then he made so many deals over there, and probably they are thinking that U.S. is supposed to be, continuing to buy their oil. And then here we are, Trump looking at Venezuela like this.
I don't really have an idea how rulers in oil-producing countries in the Middle East are thinking. My view is they'll probably just see this as another one of Trump's things. I think that they understand that, as I said, the whole thing is very unlikely to come off in the manner in which Trump thinks it will, but I don't know. It's a good question.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Jim Rice for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving the focus on to Venezuela, Venezuelan acting President Delcy Rodriguez led a tribute ceremony honoring military personnel who were killed during a U.S. military operation on January 3rd. Rodriguez stated that Venezuela would seek vindication through diplomatic means rather than revenge, telling the American people that Venezuelans did not deserve aggression from a nuclear power. Let's have a look at what the interim president has shared.
Le hablo al pueblo de los Estados Unidos. El pueblo de Venezuela no merecía esta agresión vil, guerrerista de parte de una potencia nuclear. Decía yo ayer que ha pasado a ser una mancha en nuestras relaciones y en nuestra historia. Si algo digo yo que no es venganza, sino será reivindicación, será cuando le dejemos y le demos lecciones y ejemplos de lo que es la diplomacia bolivariana de paz en acción internacional. Somos hombres y mujeres de Estado. Es lecciones que aprendimos de Bolívar. Las armas son para cuidar a la República. Las armas son para defender a nuestro país, nuestra patria, nuestra soberanía, nuestra dignidad y nuestra moral. Y si yo puedo decir hoy, desde acá, desde Caracas, cuna de nuestro libertador Simón Bolívar, es que nuestros hombres y mujeres que cayeron en combate son héroes y heroínas de la patria de Simón Bolívar, y que los hermanos de Cuba, hijos de Martín, hijos de Fidel, también son héroes y heroínas de esta patria, porque como un solo pueblo combatieron en la defensa frente a la agresión ilegal y legítima.
Meanwhile, during this ceremony, Delcy Rodriguez also says that there was combat with the United States during the capture of deposed leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores. Let's listen in.
En combate. Aquí nadie se entregó. Aquí hubo combate. Y hubo combate por esta patria. Hubo combate por nuestros libertadores, por Miranda, por Sucre, por Rivas, por Urdaneta, por Manuela Sáenz, por Ezequiel Zamora, por nuestro padre libertador Simón Bolívar. Aquí hubo combate por Chávez y aquí hubo combate por Venezuela. Esa es nuestra mayor satisfacción y esa es la respuesta.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Jim Rice. He is joining us from Vigan, Philippines. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now, thank you. Now, looking back on 3rd of January, when you saw all this, what was your reaction?
Well, I think like everybody else, I was simply shocked at the entire thing. And there were several reasons to be shocked. I mean, that it happened at all. But you know, the manner in which Trump brought military forces into a sovereign state illegally and contrary to the laws of the United States of America. But apart from that, the wider shock was that there was no thought to democracy, to human rights, to the people of Venezuela. And you know, I know a little bit of Spanish, but very little. I didn't understand most of that clip. But when people in South America invoke the name of Simon Bolivar, what they're talking about is independence and sovereignty. And it seems to be a very clear message that the people of Venezuela, be they supporting Maduro or supporting the Democratic coalition, they don't want to be puppets of the USA.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. And you know, what do you think, how will US justify their move now on, as it's still unfolding and developing this news? And you know, when you highlighted a good point, like sovereignty. Of course, they're worried about the sovereignty, and in case China goes on and does the same to Taiwan, and if in case, let's say, some other country does this to North Korea or Russia does this to Ukraine, what will US say?
Well, you know, I'm really glad that you highlighted this issue of the Asia Pacific, because what the justification, if you could put that in quotes, for this, according to Vance, according to Stephen Miller, the senior advisor, and according to Trump, is basically that might makes right. That because the United States is a big military power, they can do what they want regardless of the law and regardless of people's feelings. So the U.S. is in no more position whatsoever, I would say, to be able to speak out against aggression in the Asia Pacific, especially in light, and maybe we'll talk about this later, of Trump's and Vance's belligerent talk about annexing Greenland, which would be a completely insane idea.
Yes, and you know, now looking back at this, do you see this Trump's move or the U.S. administration move towards Venezuela and taking their leaders and the First Lady, do you see this operation as a success? Because if their goal was regime change and oil access, I don't think they have exactly achieved that.
No, they haven't. And of course, it's early days yet. We don't know what's going to happen in a couple of days or a week or a month. And I just think that it's unlikely that the government of Venezuela, which is essentially the same government that Trump invaded, that they're just going to roll over and cooperate with what Trump wants to do, in his own words, to run Venezuela. I just find that very unlikely.
And what do you think, what other motive could have driven U.S. or Trump administration to do that?
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's easy. It's the oil. I mean, they had all of these pretexts. They said first it was the trafficking of fentanyl, which is a lie. It was the trafficking of drugs, and then they were killing all of these small boats in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific. So then, their whole pretext for invading Venezuela was a lie, and Trump was very candid about that when he finally did send the troops in.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Jim Rice for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Iran that the United States will strike very hard if security forces escalate violence against protesters in the country. Speaking on Sunday, Trump has said that if Iranian authorities start killing people as they have in the past, Washington will respond strongly. At least 16 people have been killed during a week of unrest in Iran as protests over rising prices and economic hardship have spread across multiple provinces, sometimes turning violent. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance voiced support for the Iranian people, saying the United States stands by those engaged in peaceful protests and seeking to have their voices heard. Iranian officials, including Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has warned against U.S. interference, saying the country will not yield to external pressure. Tehran has condemned what it called meddlesome and deceptive remarks from U.S. officials, accusing Washington of inciting violence and unrest. Let's listen in.
We certainly stand by anybody who's engaged in peaceful protest, anybody who's trying to exert their rights for free association and to have their voices heard. Obviously, the Iranian regime has a lot of problems. And as the President of the United States has said, the smartest thing for them to have done, it was true 2 months ago, it's true today, is for them to actually have a real negotiation with the United States about what we need to see when it comes to their nuclear program. I'll let the president speak to what we're going to do in the future, but we certainly stand with anybody across the world, including the Iranian people who are advocating for their rights.
There's been protesters killed in Iran. You said we were locked and loaded, ready to go. What is the line there for when the U.S. is going to get involved in those protests?
We'll take a look. We're watching it very closely. If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Jim Rice. He's a professor of international law and international affairs expert, joins us live from White. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now Thank you. Now looking at President Trump's remarks and also J.D. Vance's remarks, and also knowing that, they have issued warnings, stark warnings towards many places, not just Iran, and among some, they have taken strong actions against. So how serious do you think Iran should take these warnings against them?
Well, again, thanks for doing this segment. I think this is a really important segment for you to cover. And it was just interesting for me to hear J.D. Vance just now talking about the right of people to demonstrate peacefully when just yesterday, as I'm sure your viewers will be aware, ICE agents shot and killed a peaceful protester in the city of Minneapolis, very near to where I grew up in America. And so in terms of trying to answer your question as briefly as I can, I really don't think that people should take Trump's word at all seriously. We know that he constantly lies. And to this point, I'd just like to share with you and your viewers that I was involved in the Hong Kong democracy protests between June 2019 and 2020. And I was involved in a lot of what could only be considered to be very heavy and oppressive protests, in which we were tear gassed and pepper sprayed and chased by police. And during that time, the protesters were reaching out to then President Donald Trump again and again and again, asking him, imploring that he would speak out in favor or in support of the protesters, and urging that the police in Hong Kong would show restraint. And his reply was that he was in the middle of a trade deal at the time, and he never did. And he really betrayed the Hong Kong protesters. So I hope that that answers your question.
Right. Yes, it does. Thank you. And you know, this explicit threats of U.S. Retaliation, do you think that would affect the behavior of Iranian government?
No. I would find it hard to believe that Trump would intervene militarily in a situation that is being generated by people who are demonstrating in favor of human rights and democracy. Trump isn't in favor of those things. He's in favor of commercial deals, and he's in favor of the oil. So, and you know, when you think about it more carefully,
Yes.
what kind of actions would this take? I mean, what is he going to bomb? I just don't see that is a credible threat at all.
Yes, 100%. With that, I would like to thank Professor Jim Rice for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Asia. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will be visiting Japan on 13th January to 14th of January for talks with Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi. The summit will take place in Nara on January 13th, followed by a formal dinner. The two leaders are expected to discuss regional and global issues along with economic and social cooperation. They will also attend diplomatic events together. President Lee will separately meet South Korean residents in Japan. Seoul says the visit aims to strengthen future-oriented and stable ties between the two neighbors. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Sanjay Kumar. He's a journalist of the Korea Herald, joins us live from Seoul. Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjay, for joining us. Good to see you. Now looking at this, what do you think, what will be the top priority for South Korea and Japan during this summit?
See, from South Korean perspective, it is a part of shuttle diplomacy to balance the relationship. You know, in a South Korean proverb, it is said that "Mon chinchak poda yusinapta." That means like a neighbor is much better and much useful than a distant relative. So Japan and China both are neighbors of South Korea, and both countries are considered very important. I think the most important neighbors that they have. Of course, different agendas from geoeconomics to supply chain and industry-related cooperation is going to be on the table. But most important signal, I think, is to reactivate the shuttle diplomacy, especially to continue the Japan-Korea relationship that had been forged since decades, and especially after the Basic Relations Treaty signed in 1965. After that, there had been many ups and downs in the Japanese-Korean relations. But President Lee Jae-myung, he wants to execute the pragmatic diplomacy, not to offend any country, and especially with the neighborhood diplomacy, he wants to activate once again the shuttle diplomacy. And after APEC and the G20 summit, this Japan-Korea meeting is going to be like continuity, to be in continuity of that shuttle diplomacy.
Right. And what do you think, what signals does this summit send about the current trajectory of South Korea? Yes.
See, from a geopolitical perspective, if you focus on this front,
yes,
definitely for President Lee Jae-myung, it is this visit is a kind of balancing act as well, because South Korea has to work with China to engage North Korea, but on the other side, US, ROK, Japan, trilateral alliance is there, and South Korea is committed to follow the guidelines, follow the basic principles of that trilateral cooperation. So from a regional security perspective, South Korea has to not just engage North Korea but also China. But on the other side, Japan, US, ROK, like US, ROK, Japan relations, these are very ironclad, and to achieve like fruitful results in future, all these relationships have to be balanced. and that is why President Lee Jae-myung is looking very far, and his vision, I think, lies in this direction, because during the Kim Dae-jung and Obuchi summit also, there had been some very fruitful results, and I think President Lee Jae-myung wants to achieve some new milestones also, to show to the Korean public, there is a polarization in South Korea, because many people here see just leaning towards China may not be a good idea, and balancing Japan is really important. This is this common sentiment of many Korean people, and that is why President Lee Jae-myung, I think his task would be to balance these two most important neighborhoods, and that is why this visit, you can call it as pragmatic diplomacy or shuttle diplomacy or whatever. He would not miss any chance to send any negative signal, and that is why he is visiting Japan with also a very positive mindset.
Thank you for highlighting that. And talking about China, just a few days ago, he concluded his visit to China, if I remember correctly. So do you think that China would have maybe given some kind of message or some kind of emphasis to make sure that they have some say in the upcoming meeting of Japan and South Korea?
If you see the China's focus, they came up with some sort of comprehensive approach of urging South Korea to stand with China on right side of the history. But this right side of history can be interpreted in various means. In fact, a reporter asked the South Korean president also about that, but he referenced it to Confucius principles. So what I am trying to say here is that, for South Korea, standing with China on right side of the history, that has different meanings, and it has sensitive meaning as well as some soft meaning as well. But from China's perspective, they are urging South Korea to change their stance, or at least in present circumstances, to just lean towards China. That is their, that is China's anticipation and expectation, whatever you can call. Yes. But for South Korea, South Korea has not been leaning towards one side throughout the history, if you see. No matter there are adversaries between Japan and Korea, but that doesn't mean that South Korea would definitely be liberated from the US ROK Japan trilateral cooperation. So that is why South Korea did not iterated anything on that China's rhetoric, you can say, or China's stance, you can say. So this shows that South Korea is not ready to take any side, and their major goal is to have a denuclearized, or at least a nuclear frozen Korean peninsula. And Japan has also the same concerns. Japan, the North Korea is a threat to Japan also.
Yes.
So if you see the threat perception, then Japan and Korea share the same threat perception, and that is why South Korea would not like to go away from this basic understanding. Yeah.
Yes. Very insightful. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Sanjay Kumar for joining us today and sharing that insight from South Korea. Now we move on to our tech news. Major technology companies, including Alphabet's Google, Meta platforms, Netflix, Microsoft, and Amazon, will avoid strict new binding regulations in the European Union's upcoming digital overhaul. Instead of mandatory obligations, these companies will operate under a voluntary best practices framework as part of the new Digital Networks Act, which EU Tech Chief Henna Virkkunen is scheduled to present on January 20th, 2026. As per experts, under the draft DNA, the Commission will also set out the duration of spectrum licensing, the conditions for the sale of spectrum, and a pricing methodology to guide national regulations during auctions of spectrum, which can yield billions of euros for governments. That's all we have time for. Keep watching News 6 World for more news updates from around the world. you.